Hey guys, it's Drew with Drew Does Trucks. I have my recently erected metal building. I have several other videos on various topics about this, but today's topic is going to be electrical, wiring this building up. So the first step in getting electricity to your building has to come before you pour the slab. You're going to have to find a way to get your electricity inside the building. The best way is to run it through the slab like we've done here. I was fortunate that this already had an existing slab and we already had the electricity here. If you already have a building you haven't run electricity through, you'll have to have a service entrance, which will probably mean for most homeowners burying their wire. You don't have to go through the slab if you haven't already done that. If it's too late, you don't have a choice. So our sub panel is right there, and this goes underground and then up through the slab. It can just go up to the edge of the building, but that's your first step, is getting your electricity buried. So for this has 220 ran from that panel to this, and this is what was already existing here, so this won't apply to most people, but I'm going to show you what I'm dealing with. This is a really small sub panel. This has 8 spaces. It's not very much. 2 of them are taken up, 4 spaces, because they're 220 breakers. So we had a single 220 outlet. Now this is interesting. You're not going to have this. Your power comes in through here. For some reason they had it set up to have a meter, which it's actually really unsafe. They just have that jumpered with big pieces of cable, so that's all live. There's no reason to have that at all. I'll try and get that covered back up. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So what they do, they have the main power feed coming in, bypassing that breaker, feeding this, bypassing that meter, feeding this panel here, and then this has 220 out that goes down here, which they've wrapped around and then come back in because there's some misalignment there. And this is all, I can't remember if it says on it, but it's like 2 gauge maybe. It's really big cable. So this breaker, which is a 50 amp, is actually feeding our pool. I did not set this up, that's how it was. So anyway, this is a mess. This is a death trap. Right now this is hot. We have some cutoff stubs from when I demolished the old building. I left one live. It's a single 15 amp breaker that's feeding our lights. Obviously we're gonna lose that when we disconnect this. So we're gonna be replacing it with this Square D HomeLink panel. This was $109 at Home Depot, and it came with a couple of these breakers. I bought some extra breakers. We will probably be reusing that 50 amp, because once you go up in size they get a little bit more expensive. I didn't want to reuse most of the other ones. They are in a little rough shape, as you can tell. So we're using all 20 amp breakers except for a single circuit. We're going to be wiring 6 UFO lights on the ceiling. So those are going to be run off a single 15 amp breaker, which you can run 6 fixtures per NEC. Those fixtures are 100 watts each, so it'll be 600 watts total, which is like 5 amps, so it's well under 15 amps. All the other outlets in this garage are going to be 20 amp. We are using, well, we'll get to that in a second. All of our outlets are going to be 20 amp. This is a garage. We're going to be using grinders, saws, all kinds of tools out here. I do not want 15 amp outlets. That is a decision you'll have to make, because NEC would allow you to use 15 amp outlets. You just have to be aware there are tools that will trip those. So 15 amp outlets would allow you to run 14 gauge wire. We're not running any 14 gauge wire, and I'll get into that in just a second. So this is our panel. It's a 100 amp panel that should be adequate for what we will be doing here in the pool. Right here in the garage. The one thing you have to take into account, if you have a breaker like this 50 amp breaker, if everything was on the pool, that's only leaving you 50 amps before you reach the capacity of this panel. So that's just something to keep in mind. We will be running a welder, an air compressor, and a heater. I got an extra 30 amp. I actually meant to get a 50 amp to replace that one, but I haven't yet. So now, as for wiring, this is a metal building. If you have a wood frame building, you can use Romex. I think we're all pretty familiar with Romex. It's going to look like this. It's basically cable inside this sheathing. Now, the thing with Romex is it has to be inside a dry environment, and it has to be protected. So it's not rated for exposure to UV light. It's not rated for vibration. It's not rated for damp environments. And it's not rated for open use, so it can't just be like visible. So for that reason, we would have to run wire like THHN wire, which is like just your, almost like the individual conductors of this is what that looks like this. You'd have to run that inside conduit, or you can run MC, or in some instances an AC, which is armor clad. So this is an MC wire, which is aluminum arc wire. This stuff is over $1 a foot from Home Depot. I found someone who had bought these 2 rolls to do a building. They said 5 years later they had just ended up using extension cords. That's a terrible decision for a lot of reasons. But anyway, he sold this wire to me for, if this is 500 feet, 250 rolls for $300. So almost half, a little more than half of what Home Depot wanted. So inside this, you have 12 gauge. This is 12-2. So you'll have your hot, your neutral, and your ground inside a metallic sheath. So this is the way to go. For me, this is much cheaper. For some reason, the bizarre economies of demand, supply and demand, this is actually the same price that Romex would have been. And then on top of that, with Romex, you would have to have all of your conduit. The problem with conduit is we would have to run conduit on top of this. So it would be sticking out into the garage. So if you wanted to like lean a toolbox against this, you would take away, an inch or whatever floor space, because we can't drill huge holes in this. These are structural, they're not that big. And we would have to run an angle anywhere that these met, right? So we have a bunch of angles that we'd have to buy or bend. That's a pain in the butt. So the MC cable is actually thin enough that we can use these, which they're bump outs to add strength to the panel. They also provide you with a wire chase. So if you're using MC cable, you can run it through these chases and not have to run it on this side of it. So that means this is still blank. When we decide to come back and use foam board, we won't have any conduit or anything to cut around. We'll just have the places where the cable comes out to our boxes. The downside of using MC cable is, first off, you're gonna have to get a bunch of connectors. I'm using these push connectors, which are really easy to use. Some people love them, some people hate them. You'll have to use these if they don't come. These actually have an isolator built into them. There are tons of good videos on MC by people that know a lot more than me. So you will have additional expense. These are about $2 each. Whereas with Romex, you could bring it in straight to the box and run it to these or THHN wire. But with MC, you have to terminate the wire in something like this that isolates it and secures it to the box. So there is additional expense there. I chose to use metal boxes because the ultimate plan for this is not to have finished walls. So these outlets are going to be exposed. They're going to be subject to being bumped into possibly and stuff. So we went with these much stronger boxes. Now, these are called handy boxes, by the way. The decision of running 20 amp breakers or 20 amp outlets means we will have to run 12 gauge wire, which is obviously more expensive than 14 gauge wire. That also means you have to buy 20 amp outlets. These are $7 each, basically. A 15 amp outlet is 96 cents. So your outlets are going to cost you 7 times. There are cheaper ones out there. None of the stores around me have any in stock. I'm sure it's a supply chain issue, which conveniently all the cheap stuff is not available, all the expensive stuff is. That's how supply chain issues work. Anyway, I'm trying to run decent stuff, so these are $1 each. These are 15 amp outlets. These are going to be for the lights. You see it says 15 amp right on it. So the 20 amp ones have this additional connector to allow you to run a 20 amp style plug. Most 20 amp appliances that I've had don't have that style plug anyway, but anyway, we're not running GFCI. This is not a damp environment or a moisture environment, whatever. So for the roof outlets, as you can see, we're running handy boxes with an L bracket. These mount to a steel stud like this. That way, if I'm standing on a ladder, I can zip it into the face of the stud without having to try and hold it and come in from the side. So that'll be much easier to install from underneath, if you can think about how we're working on that. For our walls, I got a different style handy box, just has these flat tangs. That way, for the time being, we can install these flush so that they won't protrude. That would subject them to damage. Give us a little more floor space, and we can cut our foam board to fit around them if we need to, and we can spray foam around them. For comparison, if you use these angle brackets we got for the roof, you can see how far those stick out. Not really worried about it on the roof. Nothing's gonna bump them on the roof. So we've got enough on the roof for 6 lights, and then we're gonna run a separate 20 amp circuit for 2 garage door openers. We'll be using 20 amp outlets in those. So we'll run a 20 amp on each side for our garage door openers. Those will be off a single 20 amp breaker, because both door openers probably won't be used at the same time. So even if they were, the 20 amp would handle that. Anyway, that's just so you can be familiar with what we're using. Romex can be stapled inside the wall cavity. With MC, you have to get these metal 1-hole straps to secure. This is going to be a pain to secure, because if we run these per NEC, the MC needs to be secured. There is no easy way to secure these. So we'll see. I don't know how much securement it's going to need, but we may end up just running a strap or something and using those clamps to the strap and then screwing the strap into the stud, but we'll see how that goes. For now, I'm going to start measuring. So our light switch, we're going to have a single light switch for the whole garage for the 6 fixtures. That's 48 inches off the ground. Our outlets are going to be 18 inches off the ground, which is compliant with code. We are running 8 outlets total. These are 30-foot walls. This is a 24-foot wall. NEC requires an outlet every 6 feet on any wall that's 2 feet or longer. So we actually won't be required to put an outlet on these walls, although I may add one anyway. But you'll see how that spaces out here as we get going. Basically, we'll never want for an outlet. We'll always have a 20 amp outlet close, and if we want to use 2 20 amp appliances, each wall is going to be off its own breaker. So probably do split breakers on the back, because that's where the workbench will be. So we'll have, like, let's say I wanted to run a really big grinder with some other really large 110 draw, like a heat gun. I can split them between 2 breakers. That way I won't have to worry about tripping a breaker. So anyway, that's the way I'm doing it, just based on all the stuff I've done in the past. So the first step is, for me, is going to be to measure and mount all of the outlets. We're also going to have to mount this panel. Mounting the panel is going to be tricky. It needs to go to one of these studs, and you can flush mount this panel or rear mount it. So the problem with that is we just don't have that much slack in this wire. So we're going to have to disconnect all this and label it, since we have so many different wires coming in. This 3rd wire chase, I think, comes out in the pool. It is empty, so I just shoved a piece of that tube down it, and it's being used to support this while we poured our cement and everything else. But yeah, we're gonna have to label and disconnect all of those wires. We can't do that with them live. I mean, people don't. That's a mistake. So I just had this panel put in by a licensed electrician. We had our power shut off by the power company, and then they came through and replaced this and all of our service entrance. The reason they did that, we had 100 amp service. We had multiple 100 amp sub panels, so now we have 200 amp service. We had to have it upgraded. That really wasn't specifically related to the garage, but it is going to give us greater capacity. So this is our Main power wire feed to the garage. This is not, you know, this is not conduit. And actually, I should come back and tape these up, but right now they're just run through this pipe. I am not going to dig that up because there's code and then there's common sense, and this is good enough. So ideally it would have an actual rated conduit, something like this, something that's rated for underground use, that would be watertight to the box. As you can see, this is not. This would allow water to get in it. So they make like a caulk seal that we actually need to push in there around that to seal that off. Is it already full of water? Well, the water's going to hit this box, run down, and it's going to find anything it can drip down. So there's probably already wire in that line. It is what it is. NEC allows the use of stuff like that where it's both terminations are dry, but this is wet, so it is what it is. But it will allow us to turn off our 100 amp service to the garage. These aren't labeled yet because our electrician's coming back. This is a completely separate issue that we're not tackling. I'm allowing him to do. So he's going to come back and label everything when he replaces that. For now, we'll probably just pull this out our cover so I can find our feed for this, and then we can go ahead and disconnect our lines inside the garage. All right, one thing you probably should do if you're going to be working on a bunch of electrical stuff is pick yourself up a non-conducting screwdriver. We didn't really need it for this. That panel isn't hot. If it was, it would shock you to touch it, but single screw, put your screwdriver in or pop it up. Anyway, this is what the inside of your panel will look like. This is clearly the feed to our garage. You can tell because it has those gigantic wires that it feeds. So we're gonna flip that off. That de-energizes it. Now, let's pretend we didn't see this. I'm gonna have to come back and address this. I do not like those sitting on the edges of these rough knockouts, punch outs. I'm gonna come back and sheathe those with something. Not sure what yet, but I can't leave that like that. Not happy with that. I'm gonna put some conduit caulk in there to prevent any moisture or bugs or anything from getting down in there. So anyway, this can't stay like that. Just ignore that. We'll fix that. Some of this stuff is just like old house stuff. Just for perspective, this is what we're starting with. This is what the wiring in this house looks like. So I am not happy with it. I am having it fixed, but it takes money and time. So trying to get the electrician back out here just to do these things has been like a very patience testing process. So that's yet another reason I'm trying to wire the building myself. All right, so we have our power disconnected to the garage. We're going to go inside. We're going to verify that power is off using our multimeter. If you don't have one, you should get one. So also, we're going to find my label maker. We'll print off a label, put it next to that breaker, since we now know what that breaker goes to. That way, the next time, we won't have to pull the panel off. So we have a drop cord run from another breaker. We also have a backup work light here that is cordless. So that also can hook up to that extension cord if the battery runs dead. That way we have multiple sources of light. That is very important when you're working on electricity. You don't want to be plunged in darkness when you're knee deep in an electrical box. Okay, so we have several different types of things we can use to test for power. So these are not super reliable. This one's a Klein. It's probably better than most. They're not cheap. This is basically a voltage or current detecting pen. This is another option if you have outlet. This is probably better. So what we can do is plug that in to where our lights were. I didn't realize it wasn't on. Hold on. There we go. Oh, this actually needs the batteries changed on it. I forgot. Anyway, you plug that in, it'll tell you if it has 110 volts or not. Now, for this, we have a breaker in between this outlet and that, so that's still not a very reliable way of knowing if we have power. So that's why you need a multimeter like this. This one's a Klein. That doesn't mean you need a Klein. These are more expensive. Having said that, these will last you the rest of your life. there's two different types. There's auto ranging and manual. I'm old school, I guess. I prefer the manual ones. But anyway, we want volts. So we have our connector set in our COM and our voltage. So we will come up and we will hit our mains. We have 0. Sorry, see if you can see that there. 0 volts on our meter. So we know we have no power there. And we'll check our differential to the box. Check our differential to the grounds. Just make sure we have 0 all the way around, which we do. That's our outlet from this breaker, which is switched off. And we'll come in and check. Sorry, that's our main. And we'll come in and check. Let's see here. Where's our neutral run to? I don't know if you can tell or not, especially not with this meter in the way. So we'll just focus on this. But your ground is all the way back in there. So we will check for, we have 0 there. Check here. Get on that lug. 0 there. Okay. So we have confirmed we have no power at this panel. You have to do that before you can work on something. No matter what switches you flip, especially in an old house like mine. But anytime you work on it, you have no idea what someone has come in and done before you. If they've plugged in like a suicide cord and bridged 2 circuits, if they've wired something up crazy, you just saw the breaker here. So you have to verify your power is off. So now we know that, we can start disassembling that. And I'll get back with you guys in 1 second here and I'll show you that all broken down. Hey guys, I just wanted to show you, I removed all the wires from the old panels. We kind of labeled what our wires do. Like I said, this one here is just, that was an empty run, so I'm not sure what we'll do with that yet. Getting those large gauge wire out of this panel box, because it was just stuffed in there, was an absolute nightmare. I ended up just taking the grinder and cutting down. We're not reusing the box, so I didn't care. We are reusing this wire, so I didn't want it to get any more scarred up than it already had become. That'll all get a wrap of electrical tape. Anyway, as you can see, this was all done in a really messy fashion. They had, this wouldn't fit in the ground, so they had reduced it using this crimp splice to a solid connector, and it looks like they actually reduced the diameter of the overall cable too. So we'll have to fix some of that stuff. The main reason we had to get this stuff out is this is what's going out to the pool, and this is what's coming in from the meter. So these are both going to have to stretch to wherever the, they're going to have to stretch to wherever the new meter is. That's where our power is going into the meter. Now NEC says your panel needs to be between 4 and 6 feet. This is not, we're not doing this like per code. Like I said, the code's generally a pretty good idea. In the case of panel height, there's some good reasons it'll be between 4 and 6 feet. If you think you know the main reason, put it in the comments. Pretty sure I know, but just curious to see what you guys say. Anyway, on an application like this, where we've got a wide open wall that is only going to be used by able-bodied persons, it's a hint, probably can put the panel kind of where we want. I don't want it too close to the ground so it's not subject to spray if we end up hosing the garage off or something. But look at how short these cables are. Consider that those are going to have to come in and feed the top of this panel. Now I've heard people say you can invert these, but I don't really want to do that. I want to keep it oriented appropriately. So we'll have to probably have to mount this panel a little lower than you may have traditionally seen a panel mounted. And this one, this one was pretty low too. But anyway, this is a taller panel, so it'll be much more obvious. I don't think we're going to quite achieve that 4 feet, but I'll try and get as high as I can. I need to run the cables in through one of these large knockouts, and then hopefully we'll be able to see how much room we have. The goal, of course, would be to avoid splicing these. Cables this large are very difficult to splice. This looks like they already had some no locks on them, but we'll polish them up anyway. So that's where we are with things. We're going to try and avoid having to try and lengthen these, because definitely the ideal length of these cables right now to put that box, the box at 4 feet would be right here. As you can see, this will be the top of our box. So the top of our box is going to be 4 feet. And even on a job that had to pass inspection, most inspectors probably wouldn't fail you if they understood what you were dealing with, just trying to make it the best you can. I'm sure there are plenty that would, though. But for the outdoor box, and I'll show this later, we got some of the, this is conduit seal, duct seal. This is what you use to pack it around those wires to make that watertight where it should go outside. We're also going to insulate each conductor with some 1/2-inch flex tube. That way it'll be protected where it passes through the knockouts of the box. That is not an approved use for split loom, but we're trying to make the best of what we have. So anyway, I do have to run out and do some errands here. I wanted to show you guys this. The 50 amp breaker. Did not realize this. There's a couple different variations of square D breakers. So your newer stuff looks like this. It hooks in and snaps in like this. And then one of these older ones. Here's one. Here's a 50 one. So as you can see, these are a different style breaker. So these do not install the same way. I cannot reuse that 50 amp. I will have to buy one, even though they are both square D. So, and there's ways you can tell that from the model numbers, but I'm not that into it. So the bottom line is we will have to get a new 50 amp to feed the pool if we want to maintain its capacity. You can always go with a lower size breaker. So I could wire the pool off of a 30 amp. Based on the appliances that are out there right now, that would probably be sufficient. However, we have a hot tub that we got for free. We talked about hooking that up. That would require probably the 50 amp breaker, or it would be tripping a 30 amp. But anyway, we'll see. I don't know how much 50 amps are. So we may just wire it up with a 30 amp for now. Anyway, I do have some errands to run, so we'll be back. We're going to finish mounting that box. We're going to get our power fed in, and hopefully we'll get some of our other boxes mounted today. I have a lot of other stuff I need to get done today, so that's where things are. All right, guys, as you can see, we got a little work done. We went ahead and mounted this. These are made to be nailed into a stud. We are dealing with 2.5 box tubing, so we ended up using tech screws. I used 4. I'd rather be secure, which it's pretty secure, just as secure as it would be if you would nail it to a stud. This panel, I decided, I know I said I wouldn't earlier, I actually researched it. You can invert them now per NEC, so the only ones you can't invert are old ones where a breaker is oriented vertically, like this. If a breaker is oriented vertically, it has to be oriented so that it's up when it's on, when any panel can be mounted horizontally. So I've been wrestling these huge aluminum conductors in. We put no locks on all of our connections. Since this is aluminum wire, it prevents corrosion. I'm still wrestling with the ground here, but I just wanted to share an update. We do have both legs of our main power wire hooked up. So that actually doesn't look bad if it was that way. But then this connection here goes all the way over. And my electrician had suggested just abandoning this and running new wire to the pool. But I don't think that's going to be an option, just because there's this slab, a septic tank there, 30 feet of asphalt, and all the other stuff. That's just not practical. He said, you know, you might be able to use this to pull the old stuff. He said a lot of times people would run this above ground, and then if the cable is ready to direct burial, they might just bury it directly. He said there's just no way of knowing this could be crushed. So he said he wasn't interested in pulling through it. So for now, we're gonna have to keep this. So the problem is, our wires will reach our breaker just fine. This is our ground, which is supposed to hook into these bus bars. As you can kind of see, this is going to stick out, and that's crappy. We'll have to put some kind of protection here so we don't bump it if we're moving cars and stuff around. But anyway, the big issue is there's no way this can reach that. This is already spliced. Fortunately, our hot legs do reach, so the only thing I can do is splice this. And they had this tapped into like a smaller bus bar. The right way to do that would be to get another lug to put on here, but I have never done that. I'm sure that you can. I'm just gonna have to figure out how to do it. But this is my progress report. Just wanted to show you guys that we are getting things wired up. This stain here is just from the no-locks. That's not burned or scorched. I know it looks like that right now. The no-locks is like, here's some right here on this box. It's a gray color, so it looks that color. Anyway, I'm gonna keep wrestling with this ground, get it in. It looks like, you know, I could have mounted the box up a little higher. I thought about connecting them and then mounting the box to get them at the ideal height, but struggling with the self-tappers, the box, and the cable is a little bit much by myself. So I just mounted it, and we're doing the best we can. All right, guys, it's getting dark on me today. I had to run some errands, had to go into a movie with the family, but just wanted to share what progress I made today. I learned about these black button non-metallic wiring entrances. So they allow you to basically to push your wire up through these boxes. Like that's what we should have had in that outdoor box. And they're split, so maybe I can still add some. But these are both 3/4 inch, and I can't remember what the other size I use is for the smaller one. 3/8, so it's for 1/2 inch knockout. So those just isolate that wire from those rough edges of the knockout. This is our big ass wire from the pool. That ground wire was just way too short. So we had a whole bunch of strain on this main service entrance, and I ended up moving the box up like another 6 inches. And lo and behold, I think we actually got our NEC recommendations on box mounting height. So 4 feet is right there. So this is a 2-foot box. Really go any higher and you're pushing up against that 6 foot. So box is right where it should be. Our pots were plenty long enough to reach. The ground wasn't. This is aluminum wire. This is not NEC compliant. This is not NEC compliant. I'm not an electrician. Don't do anything I tell you to do. Anything. This is for demonstrative purposes only. But the only correct way to fix this is to run new wire. This is our neutral for the 2-phase that's feeding the pool sub panel. It is aluminum wire. They don't sell aluminum wire anywhere near me. Like probably a specialty store might have it, but my stores don't have it. So this is what we did. We went and got a splicer reducer connector. These, if it was inside the box, I'd feel a lot better about it, but it's not. It's outside of the box. But it is what it is. It would be code compliant if you had a way to like weld it, like they call it CAD welding and stuff. We don't have a way to do that. I'm not gonna run all new wiring. It's people online will say, like, oh, just run new wiring. I don't think they realize it's buried and there's 100 and 150 feet of it underground. So not an option. So we used one of those, just completely isolate this side of the connector from this side. We used our no-locks. See these don't, they dead end in the middle, so there's no corrosion that can pass through. And then we used copper wire, as you can see, from here to there. I cut off that old splice That used to be code compliant, the permanent crimp. I'm told it's not anymore. I'm told only CAD welding is compliant now. It changes. What was safe like 5 years ago and might be in a million houses is not safe today. So anyway, this is the best we can do. I securely wrapped that in high quality electrical tape. At the end of the day, it's going to the ground bar. What else can you say, right? It's probably as safe as the old panel was with that really janky crimp splice in there. This is not ideal, but it's what we got to do to finish the job. So we did pick up a brand new expensive 50 amp breaker that we'll be putting down here, since our knockouts line up down here. This gives us enough. So I could have put this in the box by moving the box lower, but I wanted enough slack in this that I can put a cabinet or something over this, so this isn't just wasted floor space. You have to have 30 inches of clear floor space around that. It's, you know, like ideally you would have been able to mount your panel someplace that wasn't right over your service entrance, because you don't really have that 30 inches clear working space. We're fighting against it, but it is what it is. Anyway, once this is up, you know, maybe you could put a little workstation or something down here or a shelf. That way you don't just have like dead space for that. So it just gives you a little flexibility to push it back. The consequence of that is this is outside. It is heat shrinked, and it is wrapped in tape. It shouldn't matter, but it is. So, and we will cover it up with some more of this split loom or something when we're done, so that looks nice. And it also will be a secondary isolation against the steel wall of this. So we've got our hots up here ready to go into our breaker. That's going to be a huge pain in the butt. Looked like it was a huge pain in the butt for the last person to get them shoved in the breaker they were in. Whatever. But that's pretty much where our progress has ended. Took me 2 Home Depot runs to make it to this point. I did measure off all of my outlets to have an outlet with every 6 feet, which this is my garage. I want outlets everywhere. So this isn't just, I don't want to harp too much on code. You guys think I'm like code crazy or something, because then I turn around and do that. But I want lots of outlets. So I decided I wanted 4 outlets on all 3 walls, which is I don't really want to run more than 2 outlets per breaker. So I will have to get some additional breakers. We have plenty of wire. We have plenty of breaker space, so we can do that. But I picked up extra outlets so that when I mount my outlet boxes, I can put them where I want them. I'm gonna have to drill through that little cross member there to run drop wiring down. All the rest of it will run through the chases. I got my UFO lights today. These are supposed to be 100 watts. They are actually a little smaller than I thought they'd be. And this is just like a really cheap, partially burnt out, like Harbor Freight shop light. And it's currently lighting up like this whole area. And I'll just show you guys this. I don't know. Okay. So this is this high bay light. And again, I ordered 6 of these. And I'm starting to wonder if once you get up pretty high, like, I don't know if that's going to be bright enough. So, I don't know. I won't really know until I get all 6 of them here and try it. I guess the good thing is it's Amazon, so I can return them, but I do need to get the electrical run to the roof so that we can plug them in and try them. But anyway, I gotta go inside, put the kids to bed. That's probably the last progress video I'll make tonight. Hopefully I'll get some more outlet boxes and stuff screwed in, but it's really loud putting self-tappers into this metal building, so I don't want to keep the kids awake. Anyway, see you guys tomorrow. Alright guys, we've got our 50 amp breaker in hooked up. You'll have to excuse my voice, like, across these videos. Just been going hoarse. The dog's got in a fight. I yelled at him a bunch. That's what started it, and then just never got better. But we got everything hooked up here, as neat as it can be. We got all of our outlet boxes installed. So you got 1 there by the door, 2, 3 on this wall, 1, 2, 3, 4, because that's where my workbench will be, and then 1, 2, 3 So those are spaced out just a little over 6 foot. You're never more than 6 feet from an outlet, which I think is what code requires. None in the middle here. That would be a real pain to run. We could run one up top or something if we need power, but these are close enough to the doors. I think we'll be easily able to add outside power, and I may add an outside breaker at some point. That would have to be a GFCI outlet or breaker. But anyway, the thing I worked on, it's the next day, by the way. Obviously, it's morning time, so we got the outlet boxes installed. I'm not sure if you can see them there and there. We have 6 outlet boxes installed, evenly spaced for our UFO lights. I don't know how well the camera shows this. This is that one 100-watt UFO light that I opened. It's really hard to judge just from one. It just seems like this gave out more light, and that was actually more expensive than this. I plugged that into the plug that was on, so it's not on right now, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm gonna hang on 6. We'll wait and actually see how it lights it up. I'm not sure. The jets are flying by. I'm not sure if the value is going to be there in the UFO lights. I paid $200 for 6 of them on Cyber Monday sale. It's pretty cheap for them, but maybe you get what you pay for. I don't know. But those shop lights there are like $24 or something. I don't know. They've probably gone up. Everything else has, but the LED like fake fluorescent lights, they're pretty cheap, and that one's worked really well. It's a really old light. I've had that 5 years at least. Obviously broken, so I stepped on it, but it still works. Anyway, the main things to start doing now is to run our metallic clad wire. So I think most of our runs are going to end up coming out of the top. We're going to run some wire. There's a lot of other videos about how to run MC wire. I haven't run it. I haven't dealt with MC wire very much in my life. I've never had to. So I did pick up a an MC cutter. This actually says BX and armored. It says it cuts MC, so okay, whatever. I've never used these. I've watched some tutorials. You don't need one of these. You can twist it or break it and use cutters. But after just seeing a few YouTube videos on it, I didn't like having to come back and clean up the edges and stuff. So I figured since I'm going to have a bunch of cuts to make on this building, just look at how many boxes there are. 10 boxes on the walls, and 8 on the ceiling. So to me, it was big enough to justify paying $38 or whatever for the tool. And running things, I think we're gonna use cable ties, probably where it passes the stud. I just rechecked my code section. So how many outlets you can run per breaker, because I talked about this for a second before. I don't know if that'll end up in the video, but I'll just touch on it now. Basically, NEC, you can run an unlimited number of outlets, but you're not supposed to exceed, you're supposed to like average, I think it's like 1.5 amps per outlet, and then not exceed 80% of your breaker. It doesn't matter. This is a shop. We're going to be using big, heavy tools. So what we're probably going to do is run, definitely this back wall is going to be split between 2 breakers. The side wall may all get off 1 breaker. These are 20 amp breakers, 20 amp outlets. This side wall probably will get split just because you'd have to run 2 separate conduits. So they'll each get their own breaker, 20 amp breaker. The lights are all going to be on 1 because a single 15 amp breaker can handle those lights easily, very easily. I mean, we won't be within 50% of its rated capacity with all 6 lights on. I start running our MC. Oh, that was what I was talking about, 6 foot. Anytime you run MC, you have to support it every 6 feet. All of these trusses and columns that support them are within 6 feet of each other. Obviously, most of them are just over 4 feet. They're not all exactly the same width. But anyway, so no issues there with running them behind. They have to be secured. So we may just run a zip tie or something through. I'm not sure how I could run a clamp. to the back of those. Anytime they run up, they'll be supported every, I think vertical runs have to be supported every, it's like 3 feet or something, but we'll run the, I have a box of them here somewhere. We'll run the single tab MC clamps on those. Here they are. We'll be running those vertically, and you'll see that here shortly. So hopefully, the next update, you'll see some cable on the walls. It's about time. It is about time. Normally, when you do these in your house, you just tie your neutral and your ground together. Your old style panels, a lot of them would have 2 rows, and there was a screw or a bus that connected them. There's not anymore, I guess. It's not a thing. So these are your positives. This is your neutral. And then you should have a ground. Like these are 3-wire service, which nobody runs anymore. People run 4-wire. That's current code. So we had to run a ground. This is a 6-gauge copper ground. It is compliant with NEC for a 100-amp panel. I checked. We had to run that outside and sink a, I don't even know how many feet ground rod, 6, 8 feet, something like that. I'll show you. It was an adventure, that's for sure. I saw a tip online to put WD-40 on these, which did seem to help. I found it in a couple of these before in my life. Never this tall, never 6 feet. I used the old, whatever that thing is, 12-pound sledge there. Stood on a step ladder and had my son hold it. So that's in. So that's one less thing to worry about. We've done a lot of our wiring here to our outlet boxes. We've got a lot of our connectors done. Some lessons I learned. I should have got some of those 2, the duplex they call them, to allow 2 MCs into 1 box. That would have been helpful in a couple spots. For the most part, where I'm doubling up boxes, I've been able to route the wire in one side and out the other. Haven't wired any of the ceiling yet. I took off some of the outside cladding, the corners, to run the MC through these. I measured, I got halfway through it and then I measured. I thought about it. I could have run these outlets over here, over the roof and down to the panel, or I could have run them that way. Now, these ones here on the back wall definitely would have run this way. It's much shorter, saved like 10, 20 feet of wire. This way, I lost, I can't remember the math. It was like 4 or 5 feet difference. The reason I decided to go ahead and run them that way, I already had to loosen this corner to run this last. Otherwise, to join these 2 outlets, which are on the same breaker, I would have had to go up, over, and around, and I would have lost 10, 15 feet of wire that way. So it would have ended up being the same thing. And I just tried to think if there's any reason not to do it this way, and I think this will be better in every way. If I ever want to expand service, add outlets, the wire's already here. So the only thing running on the roof will be the garage door outlets and the ceiling lights. So that'll just simplify things a little bit. But as you can see, we ran 250 feet of wire today. All of our boxes are mounted. Some of these are terminated. I had to run to Home Depot and get that. We will have to run, this is a ground bus, grounding bar kit. So we're gonna have to install this inside the panel. And all of our entrances, I don't know if I have any here, but these are all 3 wires, so they'll look like this. So all of them will run a hot, a neutral, and this green wire will have to go to that grounding bar because this is a sub panel. They cannot be tied together. So, and the old ones were tied together. That used to be code compliant as far as I know, but this is just one of those like learning things for me. So installing my own grounding rod. This will go to that bus bar. We had to get another one of those lugs to connect our large gauge wire to the bus bar. So that together is another $20 or $25. The grounding rod was another $30, I think. The ground cable, this is 6-gauge stranded, was $20. So $100, we'll call it, for that little project. Just to be able to run that. Just every time I go to Home Depot, it's $100. So I feel better about this. I just wanted to correct that stuff. The wiring in the garage is done. As you can see, there's our 2 snap-ins with the inside cut out. Here's the one that my electrician installed, which doesn't even look like it's fully seated. It's supposed to go down to that ring. So these 2, I couldn't find a third. I did look, but I'm comfortable with the split loom. It's doing about the same thing, just being a bushing there. And then this is our duct seal. As you can see, I just kind of worked it in and around those conductors to seal up this piece of pipe that's being used as a conduit. So now we'll just put our cover back on, and that'll pretty much wrap up the outside work here. All right, guys, I have all of my ceiling lights wired up, and I've done some work here on the box. Just hooked up that one breaker. We hooked up our ground bar bus here. There's no light in here because that light I was using is now hooked up. We hooked 70-pound self-tapping anchors into these with 70-pound anchors with 2 self-tapping tick screws, and I used some carabiners rated at 170 pounds, I think, to hang them with, and they have a safety chain that goes back. I realized after installing these lights, I could have went with a single outlet right down the middle and saved half my money, but this is probably better. I don't know how great these lights are, if they stink or whatever. This will allow me the ability to put as many lights in a row. Like if I want to do traditional shop lights, I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, because I have 4 outlets there, and the same here. So that would definitely be enough. And even if I decide to put more in the middle, you're never more than 5 feet away, which is how long the cords are on most of these shop lights, 4 or 5 feet. So it gives us the flexibility. That's kind of like trying to do this. I want the flexibility to not have to go back and redo stuff. I'm trying to keep it so if I do want to go back and redo, it's like I'm leaving myself room for expansion, but I don't want to have to redo the ceiling for sure. The only thing I've left on the ceiling are the 2 garage door things. So I am going to try and power up this panel. Got everything controlled around it. I do have those plastic safety shields. Actually, I should probably put those on. Leave the camera here. We're gonna go flip on our breaker and see what happens. The lights work. All right. So you may have heard my wife just say dinner is ready, but the lights are on, so that is a small victory. I will have to turn power back off probably to continue to wire breakers into that. I'm not really comfortable working around them with it on. Now I can't control it with that breaker there. So now this is pretty bright. I don't, I never know how much the camera picks up, but those lights are pretty bright. Like I could see wanting it brighter if you're working on stuff down here, but I think for now at least, especially since they're paid for it, that'll do. All right, guys, it's about bedtime. I got called back in to do my dadly duties, putting the kids to bed. Just wanted to come back out and show you what we accomplished tonight. We got our, I know the glare from the lights, it's kind of making it hard to see, but I got my outlets finished for that I intended to use for the garage door openers. Those are wired in to a breaker, and just to try and neaten the wiring, I was trying to go to this side here. And the other thing is I used a label maker just to try and make all the labels. Made this one huge, ended up covering the 6, so I made a little 6 to go with it. but still very easy to read. So try and do this as I go so I don't lose track of like which ones are which. It'll be a lot easier to do if I just do them as I go. And then I stuck the panel cover with a couple screws just so that's covered up, because that is all hot now. So, and we used to have an outside light up here at the top of the building, and I took it off obviously when we took down the old building. So I still have it. My wife asked me to put that back up. She misses having the kind of the security light around the vehicles, especially when I'm not here. So that ideally would be switched. So I have to put a box up there, which means running power all the way from there. So that's a long run. So we'll see. We got our lighting fixture hung. This is an all steel, outdoor rated for wet environments setup. So basically, I had this light, which I got off Amazon. This was what I had on the old garage. It was supposed to be rated for wet environments. It can't be, because it doesn't even have a ground wire, and it's not plastic, so it's plastic, so it's non-conductive, so there's nowhere to even ground it. So Home Depot had that, which I put a photoelectric eye in. It was a pain in the butt to set it up this way. We brought our MC up into a metal box, a handy box, and then we ran 3/4 inch PVC, which is watertight, into a O-ring sealed box. So basically from the metal box down, it's watertight, and then the metal box is sealed and threaded with a lock nut into the back of that housing. So that's all wired correctly and should be good. This is how much, I can't believe that's it. That's probably less than 50 feet of MC out of 500 feet that I had to wire this. It's crazy how fast you go through it. But the only things left to do are these holes in my panel, which are going to be a circuit for an electric heater, a circuit for a welder, and an air compressor. Those are all 220. So I'm not like an expert welding, or an expert wiring genius, as you guys figured out by now. But what I figured out is there are different types of 220. So there's like, and they have like NEMA categories, but there's basically what you use inside your house is usually going to be a 4-wire 220 that has 2 hot legs, a neutral, and a ground. So you have to have your neutral. Between your neutral and any of the hot legs, you'll have 110. And then the 210 legs, they alternate in phase. If you don't have that neutral, you won't have 110. So like on a 220 oven, the clock and the timing controls and all that's apparently usually 110. Same on a dryer, like a control board might be 110 volts. So they need that neutral to get 110 off of one of the hot legs. On industrial equipment like welders, I guess bandsaws, planers, air compressors, stuff like that, they call it, I can't remember the name of it, but basically you have a ground and then you just have 2 hots, and there's no neutral on that setup because electric motors can use the varying phase to generate basically more power from the same size motor than a 110 would be able to. So that's like this been the standard apparently for years, so it continues to be the standard. So you can actually wire 220 for a welder or industrial equipment using 12-2 like this, which has an insulated 3rd conductor. So I could have wired those circuits. Now I would have had to use a 20 amp breaker. The weird part about it is the old breaker. So the old breaker that was being used on the welder, which I never paid attention to because it was already set up before I got there, was a 20 amp breaker. So you could have run 12-2 off a 20 amp. I got a 30 amp breaker. That's what's recommended for welders and stuff. Now, for a 30 amp breaker, you're supposed to run 10 gauge wire. a tractor going by. This is 10 gauge wire. This is just a cut off. I wanted to be able to keep this old plug, so I just cut off this when I was demolishing the building. This is 10 gauge wire. So they ran 10 gauge wire, which would feed a 30 amp breaker, and they ran a 20 amp breaker, which I don't understand. Why wouldn't you have run a 30 amp breaker if you had already run the 10 gauge wire for it? Just a weird decision to me, but I never had any issues with tripping that breaker, a 20 amp breaker. So that tells me I probably could have run a 20 amp breaker and run that same welder with that same plug. If I could have run a 20 amp breaker, that means I could have run that 12 gauge wire that we already had. Wiring's really expensive, and 10 gauge wire is super expensive. So anyway, I just bit the bullet. I did not want to spend that money. That's so much money just to be able to have those hookups, but I want to be done with this. All right, so I've been working on this as allows. I was really feeling like crap for a couple days, didn't get much work done, but now I think the panel's pretty much done. As you can see, we've got plenty of space to add 2, 4, 6, 8 more circuits if we need to. Everything is wired. We wired up this 220 heater. I wired up an outlet here using 10-3 wire and a 30 amp breaker for a welder. Got in a big argument with a bunch of electricians on Facebook. I had some for it, some against it, but at the end, NEC allows smaller gauge for intermittent use, dedicated appliances, and a welder is specifically on that list. And then if you delve into it deep enough, there's actually a chart. So you could actually run a 50 amp breaker on 10 gauge wire for a welder, but we're running a 30. It was off a 20 amp on the old panel and it never tripped it. So hopefully we won't have any issues, but if we do, we can upgrade to a 50, I think, with this wire. Double check that chart, but anyway, it's just an old school thing. Like everybody's like, oh, you need to run 6. Well, it's if you go by a standard load chart, which a welder doesn't require because it's not steady use. Like when you get up to amp draws that large, are traditionally going to be industrial appliances like constant draw appliances like a fan or something like that. Well, fans have like an initial startup attire, but anyway, it's not like a welder where it's going to change. So anyway, intermittent use, bigger breaker, that's all you need to know. Here in the corner, we ran 10 gauge over 30 amp breaker. That's for air compressor. That should be more than adequate for that compressor and any compressor I need to use. It also puts my outlet in that corner, so if I want to move the air compressor outside, I have room. Now, I just finished wiring this up. This is a heater, a 220 heater. It's out of my old kitchen when we bought the house. This heater was in there. It worked. It is thermostat controlled right here. The knob is missing. Probably going to give this a refresh, maybe wire brush it and hit it with some high temp spray paint. But before I go crazy, I want to make sure it still works. It has sat outside in storage, in covered storage, but for like 5 years since I removed it to remodel the kitchen. So it's wired up to this breaker here. All right, fan kicks on. Got some little cobwebs and stuff down here. That's already getting hot. I really hope this works. I have a gas heater that I haven't hooked up yet, but I haven't been using the kerosene heater that I borrowed. There's kerosene $7 a gallon. So if I can get this on, I'll be able to turn it on while I'm working in here. All right, so I've been working on this as allows. I was really feeling like crap for a couple days, didn't get much work done, but now I think the panel's pretty much done. As you can see, we've got plenty of space to add 2, 4, 6, 8 more circuits if we need to. Everything is wired. We wired up this 220 heater. I wired up an outlet here using 10-3 wire and a 30 amp breaker for a welder. Got in a big argument with a bunch of electricians on Facebook. I had some for it, some against it, but at the end, NEC allows smaller gauge for intermittent use, dedicated appliances, and a welder is specifically on that list. And then if you delve into it deep enough, there's actually a chart. So you could actually run a 50 amp breaker on 10 gauge wire for a welder, but we're running a 30. It was off a 20 amp on the old panel, and it never tripped it, so hopefully we won't have any issues. But if we do, we can upgrade to a 50, I think, with this wire. Double check that chart. But anyway, it's just an old school thing. Like, everybody's like, oh, you need to run 6. Well, it's if you go buy a standard load chart, which a welder doesn't require because it's not steady use. Like, when you get up to amp draws that large, are traditionally going to be industrial appliances, like constant draw appliances, like a fan or something like that. Well, fans have like an initial startup tire, but anyway, it's not like a welder where it's going to change. So anyway, intermittent use, bigger breaker, that's all you need to know. Here in the corner, we ran 10 gauge over 30 amp breaker. That's for air compressor. That should be more than adequate for that compressor and any compressor I need to use. It also puts my outlet in that corner, so if I want to move the air compressor outside, I have room. Now, I just finished wiring this up. This is a heater, a 220 heater. It's out of my old kitchen. When we bought the house, this heater was in there. It worked. It is thermostat controlled right here. The knob is missing. Probably going to give this a refresh, maybe wire brush it and hit it with some high temp spray paint. But before I go crazy, I want to make sure it still works. It has sat outside in storage, in covered storage, but for like 5 years since I removed it to remodel the kitchen. So it's wired up to this breaker here. All right, I mean, fan kicks on. Got some little cobwebs and stuff down here. That's already getting hot. I really hope this works. I have a gas heater that I haven't hooked up yet, but I haven't been using the kerosene heater that I borrowed. There's kerosene $7 a gallon. So if I can get this on, I'll be able to turn it on while I'm working in here. And then I'm probably going to start on the garage doors here, at least getting a bottom panel together so I can do my spacing, start to work on my hardware and all that. So anyway, nice. So we have heat now. It's nice. Things are coming together slowly. Really did not end up with much extra wire. 125 feet of 10 gauge. And this is what's left. I doubt that's 50 feet. And about maybe a little bit more of that 12 gauge. But, you know, it's all done. So, and I'll have more wire if I want to add more circuits. Somehow I ended up with an extra 20 and an extra 30 amp breaker, but I have a whole bucket full of extra stuff here that's going back to Home Depot, probably for store credit. I don't know if I should keep the breakers in case you want to add another circuit or what, but for now the wiring's done. And man, it's been such a process. I bet I spent pretty close to $1,000 wiring this garage, between the cable, the ground rod, all of my clamps, all of my wire nuts, all my outlet boxes, all my outlets, all my face plates, my greenies, my pigtails, my 220 outlets, lids boxes, the sealing boxes. Yeah, I bet it's pretty close to $1,000. I'll have to add up the receipts to know for sure, but you know, this panel and the breakers alone, all together, a couple $100. Panel was like $140. Each of those 30 amp breakers, so like $15-16. So it definitely adds up. And I did the whole neutral, the extra neutral bar, the ground bar. Yeah, we've definitely made a ton of progress on this, and I feel pretty good about that.